Often in wrestling, when someone wins a title, it's expected. Hell, often it's the climax of a long-running story. Just look at Steve Austin in 1998 or Cody Rhodes in 2024. Other times, though, a title change seems to come out of nowhere and surprise us all. But what are the biggest examples of this in wrestling history? Well, that's exactly what we're going to be looking at right now, starting with one of the more recent examples, Ethan Page becoming NXT World Champion. Yes, prior to 2024, it would have been hard to think of Ethan Page as being a world champion in WWE, as while he was always a great wrestler, he was never a star on the level of some of the other names who have held such belts. No, he was more known for being a good hand who could always deliver in the ring when asked to in other places, such as TNA, Ring of Honor, and AEW. So how did he manage to ascend so quickly once he joined the NXT roster in May of 2024 here? Well, after signing with WWE and reporting straight to NXT, it seems that the behind-the-scenes booking team took a liking to Page and gave him a lot of opportunities to shine. And boy, would he make the most of these opportunities, as it wasn't long before he'd be calling himself champion. And this victory would come at 2024's Heatwave event, as Page would win a fatal four-way match to win the title. And after this, he'd go on to hold the belt for the next few months, defending it in some great bouts. Yes, this run was a real career high, and something the Ontario native was deserving of, but was certainly a random win that few saw coming. Of course, Ethan Page isn't the only former TNA alumni who recently walked into WWE for the first time and found themselves winning a title instantly, though. No, mere months later, the exact same situation would play itself out with our next subjects, the Motor City Machine Guns, when they became WWE Tag Team Champions. Yes, it's long been known that the Motor City Machine Guns are one of the best tag teams in the world, and that throughout their career, their style has proved to be so influential, many of the duos you see working to a high level today likely wouldn't exist without them. But up until 2024, they never managed to get that run on a big stage, and this was always the one mark against them. Not that this seemed to be an issue to Chris Sabin and Alex Shelley, though. No, they seemed more than happy to dominate places like TNA and Ring of Honor, becoming tag team champions multiple times over in the process. But in the last year or so, something obviously changed. And so that was why, when their most recent TNA contracts ran out in the summer of 2024, they decided to test the free agency market. And this eventually led to the Guns signing on the dotted line with WWE, and from there immediately being sent over to the SmackDown roster. Still though, even if such a legendary team were now on Friday nights, it didn't mean they were going to succeed in terms of title success. No, with them now being in the twilight run of their careers, many assumed they'd just been brought in to put on good matches and get other younger duos over. But this was not the way things played out in the end, because it was after only a few weeks as part of WWE when Sabin and Shelley found themselves challenging DIY for that brand's tag team titles and going all the way by winning them. That's right, in a scene which would have made fans of mid to late 2000s Impact very happy, the Motor City Machine Guns were now standing on top of the mountain in WWE, with this finally allowing them to cross that last item from their bucket list as they fully solidified themselves as an all-time legendary pairing. That said, while MCMG might be better known for their tag team antics, this isn't to say the two haven't ventured out into singles action as well, mostly during their time working in the Impact Zone. Hell, at one point, this even led to another random title change when Chris Sabin became the TNA World Champion for a while. That's right, back in 2013, fans would be treated as something special, as it was while undergoing a rare singles run in the X Division that Chris Sabin found himself earning a shot at the top prize in Nashville, the one then being held by Bully Ray. Of course, by this point, Bully Ray, himself too once a tag team guy, had firmly established himself as a singles star. And so, when one half of the Motor City Machine Guns challenged him for his gold, it was expected it would be a really easy night for the former Dudley boy. Not because Sabin wasn't great, but because he just didn't have that same level of experience as a solo act. In the end though, that's what made it all the more surprising when, at the conclusion of their big bout at July 18th's Destination X that year, it would be Sabin who was standing tall with the gold around his waist. What would he do from here? Well, he wouldn't hold the title for very long, with him losing it back to Bully Ray in his first defense. His performance in both bouts went a long way towards showing he was far more than a fluke champion. No, this was definitely a case of quality over quantity when it came to his run as champ. Sure, the short length of it has made it even easier to forget about in the years since, and it has also made it all the more random in hindsight, but random as it may have been, the sight of Chris Sabin as a singles world champion is still one we're glad exists, as it shows just how great wrestling can be at times. And once it was over, the 7-time tag team champion would keep the momentum going by returning to partnering with Alex Shelley as they further solidified their status as legends of tag team wrestling, a pair who can stand right up there with other modern day's greats of the division like the Usos and the New Day. And that's a status they hold right up until the present day. Still though, we'll never forget that brief moment where Chris Sabin reached the mountaintop in the singles division as well, as it's just such a great addition to his overall career. But then it's not like TNA hasn't had random world champions since this moment, and no, we're not talking about the time Alex Shelley spent as champ here. Rather, we're talking about the time a woman broke the mold by holding a semi-major men's world title for the first time ever when Tessa Blanchard won the big one in Impact. That's right, let's flash back to 2019 for a moment, a time when the wrestling landscape was a very different place. Vince McMahon was still in charge of WWE, AEW was only just getting started, and over in TNA, they were about to make history. What history was this? Well, they were about to take their men's world title and give it to a woman. And the reason TNA decided to do this was because Tessa Blanchard was an absolute phenomenon in the ring. But then given the fact this was the daughter of legendary Four Horsemen member Tully Blanchard, maybe that shouldn't come as a surprise. No, we all should have seen it coming in hindsight, especially as the summer of that year dawned and the momentum the Charlotte native had been building up really hit that next level. And Tessa would ultimately have her big moment at the Hard to Kill pay-per-view on January 12, 2020, as it was here that, in what was supposed to be a defining moment for both her and for the company, Tessa would beat Sami Callihan in the main event to take home the gold for her own. Yes, it was history being made in front of our eyes, and yet another sign of a woman breaking through the glass ceiling. So that's why it's such a shame it all had to be so short-lived then. And the reason it was so short-lived was because on the day of the big win, Tessa got into some major trouble behind the scenes, with this effectively nuking any goodwill many of the fanbase had for her. And this left TNA forced to act. And the way they acted was to keep Tessa off of TV for the immediate future as they figured out what to do next when it came to her reign on top. How would things go following this? Well, with it being the point the world went into shutdown, the decision would effectively be made for Impact when, after their new champion was unable to make a series of dates, they'd be forced to strip her of the gold anyway, meaning she'd only get to make one successful defense before it was all over against Taya Valkyrie. Is Tessa Blanchard's reign more random than our next entry, however? The time Cody Rhodes and Jey Uso became undisputed WWE Tag Team Champions together in WWE. How the heck did this one happen? After all, Cody Rhodes and Jey Uso have never been regular tag team partners. In fact, for most of his career, Jey has been in a duo with his twin brother Jimmy, and during the rare times the American Nightmare has entered the tag division, it's usually been with people like Ted DiBiase Jr. or his own brother, Goldust. But then 2023 happened, and during that year-long stretch between him losing to Roman Reigns at WrestleMania 39 and finally overcoming the Tribal Chief at WrestleMania 40, the grandson of a plumber found himself needing something to do to keep himself busy. Enter Jey Uso, someone who, while he had been a heel as part of the Bloodline for 3 years prior to that, had now just turned babyface after leaving the family behind and jumping over to Raw. Understandably though, given his past antics, he didn't find many friends in the babyface locker room once he did show up on Monday nights. One person who did have his back, however, was Cody Rhodes. Why was this? Well, we suppose Cody truly believed that Jey had changed, and that was what led to the two of them deciding to team up at this point and go after some tag team gold together. Sure, given their collective star power, it might seem obvious in hindsight they were going to beat the Judgment Day when they challenged Finn Balor and Damian Priest for the unified Raw and SmackDown belts at October 7th's Fastlane that year. But considering they had no history of teaming together, and so had not worked out an obvious chemistry with one another, many fans at the time assumed it would just be another successful defense for the Judgment Day. And that's what made it such a surprise then, and so random feeling, when the bout came to an end with the babyface duo on top. Where would Cody and Jey go now that they were tag team champions and, as a result, had a passport to visit either of WWE's main roster shows anytime they wanted? Well, they'd make use of this by appearing on both SmackDown and Raw over the following weeks, defending their titles against all comers, all until the point they eventually lost them back to the Judgment Day on October 16th. But this wouldn't be the only time an odd couple duo had a seemingly random run as tag team champions in WWE. No, years prior to this, back in 2004, way before either Cody Rhodes or Jey Uso ever made their debuts, a similar story would be playing itself out with our next subjects, Charlie Haas and Rico. Now, if you know Charlie Haas, then you likely know him for one thing, being a great tag team wrestler. That said, throughout his career, the most successful period he ever had as part of a tag team was clearly his time spent with Shelton Benjamin. Hell, while a duo, those two were able to win gold on a total of 4 separate occasions across both WWE and Ring of Honor. But this wasn't the only time Haas would be able to call himself a champion in the tag team division. No, it was back in 2004 that after his Fed run with Shelton Benjamin came to an end, the Oklahoma native found himself looking for a new partner. And the partner he'd find here would be a surprising one, to say the least. Why was this? Well, because it was Rico Constantino, the man who up until then had been known primarily for being the personal stylist to Billy and Chuck. As you'd expect then, the idea that Charlie Haas and Rico would have in-ring chemistry seemed unlikely to fans watching at the time. But much to everyone's surprise, this is exactly what the pair proved to have. So much chemistry would they share, in fact, on the April 20th episode of SmackDown that year, they defeat the Too Cool pairing of Rikishi and Scotty 2 Hotty to become WWE Tag Team Champions. No, it wouldn't be a long reign. In fact, it would come to an end only a couple of months later when the Dudley Boys beat them for the belts. But like with Cody Rhodes and Jey Uso or Chris Sabin, that only makes this one all the more random and all the more worthy of inclusion in today's video. Really though, more than anything else, what this reign represents is a snapshot of where the WWE Tag Team division was by the time the mid-2000s came around. A weird place where random odd couple duos were thrown together on a seemingly haphazard basis, kept together for a few months, and then moved over into a feud with one another. But what about WCW? Didn't they have their own random title changes too? Specifically in the tag team division? Why, yes they did. And one of those teams is our next subject as it happens, the one made up of Rick Steiner and Judy Bagwell. Who was Judy Bagwell? Well, she was the real-life mother of Buff Bagwell, then star of World Championship Wrestling. Obviously, though, she wasn't a wrestler, so her path toward winning a title was never going to be a normal one. No, that all came about after a very strange and, some would say, random set of circumstances. Yes, it was in November of 1998 that after ditching his prior tag team partner Kenny Chaos, Rick Steiner was forced to find a new one. And he was forced to do this fast as at that point in time, he was one half of the WCW Tag Team Champions, a set of belts he couldn't defend alone. But while it might have been obvious for him to choose a big name here like Bill Goldberg, Sting, or even Hulk Hogan, in the end the Michigan native chose to go with someone who wasn't even an in-ring performer. Why was this? Well, it was all a ploy to get in the head of one of his opponents that night, namely Buff Bagwell. That's right, on the November 9th episode of Nitro from that year, Rick was due to defend his gold against both his brother Scott and Buff. So looking to enact a bit of psychological warfare and throw the opposing team off of their game then, he revealed his new partner that night to be none other than Judy Bagwell. Of course, given the fact that Rick won the match that night pretty much single-handedly, this would mean going forward, Judy Bagwell was now going to be a WCW Tag Team Champion too. And before you ask, yes, we've checked, and this definitely didn't happen in 2000. WCW was actually going off the rails long before that. How would Judy fare now that she had gold around her waist? Would she and Rick Steiner go on a tear through the entire tag team division? Not exactly. Because during the rematch between the four at World War III a few weeks later, Buff's mother would get injured, and this would mean her mighty reign with the gold would ultimately have to come to an untimely end. Sure, it might have only been short-lived, but the fact it happened at all is reason enough for people to wonder what the hell WCW were thinking by making such a move back during a period that they were arguably still supposed to be riding high. Was it just sheer hubris? Or did they honestly think it was a great idea? Either way, it's certainly one of the most random tag team title runs the wrestling world has ever seen. But it's not the only time a non-wrestler has found themselves holding tag gold over the years. No, back in WWE towards the end of the 2010s, the same thing would occur when Braun Strowman and Nicholas became Raw Tag Team Champions. How did it all happen? Well, in the weeks leading up to WrestleMania 34, Braun Strowman had made his intentions clear in that he wanted to take the Raw Tag Team titles away from The Bar. Of course, in fitting with his character though, he felt he didn't need a partner to do this. No, he wanted to do it alone. One person who didn't agree with an assessment, however, was then Raw General Manager Kurt Angle. He instead demanded that the Monster Among Men find a second if he was going to challenge Sheamus and Cesaro. And that led to the night of WrestleMania coming, and the big man choosing to just select a random person from the audience. and Braun would go on to pick a 10-year-old boy named Nicholas. No, you didn't hear us wrong. What followed was a preteen pairing up with Strowman to not only challenge the Bar, but beat them. And this meant that by the time all was said and done, Nicholas would be a Raw Tag Team Champion, and as a result, the youngest champion in WWE history by a considerable distance. Needless to say, though, Nicholas, who was in truth the son of referee John Cone, would not be able to defend his title going forward. No, he had too much schoolwork getting in the way of that. So it was then that the following night on Raw, he'd make an appearance to announce his vacancy of the gold, and because he never lost the belt in a match, that means he's still technically undefeated, and at WrestleMania no less. Will this be the start of an Undertaker-esque win streak for him at the Showcase of the Immortals? Who knows? Anything's possible. Hell, maybe the main event of WrestleMania 50 will be him taking on Brody Lee's son, -1. One thing's for sure though, until that happens, he'll be primarily remembered for his time being a tag team champion with Braun Strowman, with this being only the second most unlikely tag team champions we can think of, the first being Bret Hart and Bill Goldberg in WCW. Yes, it's wild that the Hitman and Goldberg were tag team champions together back in December of 1999, if for no other reason than because we all know the history between them. Hell, it's become a bit of a meme at this point that Bret isn't a fan of Bill's to say the least, perhaps even more so than he ever disliked a Shawn Michaels or a Vince McMahon. That's right, seeing Bret Hart and Goldberg on the same page, that's just weird with the benefit of hindsight. That said, back in 1999, no ill feelings had developed between them yet. And so it was fairly normal that they'd choose to team up together as they were both baby faces, and mega ones at that. So when it came time for someone to take the WCW tag team titles away from Creative Control, aka the Harris brothers, they seemed like an obvious fit for a supergroup able to get the job done. And that's exactly what they do, because despite not being a regular duo, it was on the December 7th episode of Thunder that year that they were able to dethrone the heels and, in the process, become the new champions themselves. A little bit random at the time? Sure. Very random in hindsight? Yeah, absolutely. But then, by this point, there were a lot of random things happening in WCW on a regular basis. And as if there needed to be any further randomness added to this reign, it would only last for 6 days before it came to an end, not even a full week. That's right, as was the tradition with wrestling at the turn of the millennium, belts changed hands on a dime. And so it was that when the new babyface megapowers of Bret Hart and Bill Goldberg engaged in their first defense against the Outsiders on the December 13th episode of Nitro, they lose. What happened to their team after that? Well, it wouldn't last. No, each man would go back over to their own thing for, well, a week. Yeah, it was only 6 days later at Starrcade that the two would find themselves in the ring again, this time on opposite ends. And this was the fateful evening that Bret took an errant mule kick from Bill and ended up suffering a concussion which would be so bad it would cause him to retire mere months later. And this has been the cause of the heat between the duo in the years since. But let's move away from that and back over to WWE instead, as it's there we find our next random title win, one which happened in 2004 when Carlito became United States Champion. And the reason his first run with the US Gold felt so out of the blue was because it happened during his first night on the SmackDown roster. Yes, it was on October 7th of that year that he showed up to challenge then United States Champion John Cena, and with a little help from a steel chain he used behind the referee's back, even be able to beat him. Sure, this isn't the only time a wrestling company has done the gimmick of someone coming in on night one and winning a title, but usually the person on the losing end isn't someone who's being prepared to be the next face of the company. In this case, however, that was exactly what happened, as it was Big Match John who ate the fall. And for that reason alone, it was hugely shocking to see a rookie come in and get the better of him right away. How would Carlito fare after this big victory? Well, using all the momentum it afforded him, he'd go on a 14-match undefeated streak, fully establishing himself as a player in the process. And it wasn't just nobodies he was beating here either. No, it would be names like Rey Mysterio, Eddie Guerrero, and Rob Van Dam who fell to the power of being cool like he was. Sure, he would end up losing eventually. That was always going to be inevitable. Nobody's win streak lasts forever. But during that period, he was able to show that he truly belonged in the spot he was in, and the only reason he was able to prove this was because he called his shot so spectacularly on night one by beating John Cena. Clearly then, this is an example of a random title change that did only good things for everyone involved, even Cena, as it allowed him to eventually start transitioning over to the world title scene. and it's one which the effects of are still being felt today, as even now in 2025, Carlito remains a part of the Raw roster as a member of the Judgment Day 2.0, alongside Finn Balor, JD McDonough, Liv Morgan, Dominic Mysterio, and Raquel Rodriguez. But then all of the examples we've looked at today were good in their own ways, even if what was good about them was simply having a camp value. And that's why they each deserve their own spot in this video as some of the most random title changes wrestling has ever given us.